In the interview today, we'll be hearing from Bryan Blackford about how to create a strategic plan for your church and why it matters. And today is just part one. In the next episode, we'll hear from Bryan about the 5 keys to successfully implementing your church's strategic plan. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you will too. So that's coming up in the interview section. Thank you so much for your feedback on the show. You can leave a comment on the podcast show notes at pastorsandmoney.com/podcast or on the YouTube channel, or message me on Instagram or Facebook at pastorsandmoney. You can also email me, joy@pastorsandmoney.com. I love to hear from you. This show is really a labor of love for me. I'm so passionate about helping our pastors and churches be healthy financially so we can make heaven more crowded. Some of you have told me how much this information is needed. So I would really appreciate it if you could support the show in 2 ways. First, if you can share it with your friends or family who are in ministry, send them an episode that might be helpful to them. And second, you can support the show financially and help cover some of the costs by joining the community at patreon.com/pastorsandmoney. You'll get some monthly bonus content as my thank you for helping get this material to the people who need it. For our spotlight today, we're featuring Steve and Julie Kramer, missionaries to the Netherlands. Here's a quick word from Steve about what they're doing.
Hello, my name is Steve Kramer. My wife Julie and our 2 kids, Case and Selah, are newly appointed Assembly of God World missionaries headed to the Netherlands. That's right, Dutch country. Many of you may know it as Holland, the land of wooden shoes and tulips. And to better understand our ministry focus, it helps to know my story. See, when I was born 3 pounds, 2.5 months premature. Doctors told my parents that if I even survived the night, I would never walk or be productive. But thankfully, God had other plans. Ephesians 3:20 says, God is able to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine, according to his power at work within us. And that's certainly been true in my own life. I grew up in wheelchairs, body casts up to my neck, spent many months in Shriners hospitals after surgeries. But like I said, God had other plans, and he's been using our ministry and my story, my testimony, which is really his testimony, to help resource local churches around the world to minister to the most vulnerable among us. That includes special needs families, those with mental health issues, at-risk youth, and pregnant mothers and the unborn. And then we got invited back to a land we know well. See, we served for 10 years as missionaries in the Netherlands. Our kids were born there. They have Dutch names. And God spoke to us one day and said, I want you to go back to the States. And we didn't know why. It was tough for us. We thought we'd be in the Netherlands forever. But now we see why, because God, during that 10-year span, really has highlighted and emphasized my miraculous story with cerebral palsy and used that to bless churches. And now we're getting to take the ministry we've been doing the last 10 years to the Netherlands, to Europe. And we're really believing that God will help us to equip, resource, and inspire churches with scalable plug-and-play models of ministry. And really it comes down to this. Luke 14 says, go out to the highways and the byways and compel them to come in, the blind, the lame, the crippled, the poor, the forgotten, the voiceless. And so we would love to see every church in the Netherlands, in Europe, in America, not only welcome the most vulnerable in communities, but also celebrate them. I'm a big believer that a lot of what God's brought you through is what he wants to do through you to bless others. He works both in us and through us. And so we're very excited. There's a lot of hopelessness in this world, but the great thing is many churches are beginning to reach out to the most vulnerable, and we're excited about what God's doing and what he's going to do in the Netherlands. So if you get to Europe, give us a call. Check us out on the website, get connected with us. We'd love to show you around and connect you with what God's doing there. We're so thankful for this opportunity to share our story. Bless you.
You can learn more about the Kramers and how you can support them at pastorsandmoney.com/spotlight. Now let's get into the interview. Bryan Blackford has served as a teacher, Christian school principal, and executive director of a large church. He currently consults with ministries in strategic planning, governance, and generosity. He coaches ministry leaders one-on-one so they grow in their capacity to lead and maintain their sanity. He also serves as a Ramsey preferred coach, helping people manage their finances and build wealth. You can find out more about how Bryan helps ministries and ministry leaders at theministrygeek.com. Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Joy, for having me today. I'm very excited and honored to be here to talk with you and your audience, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Awesome. We're so glad to have you. Tell us about your ministry background and the work that you're currently doing with churches.
I was blessed to grow up in a strong Christian family in a really strong church. And I started out my professional career teaching in a Christian day school, progressed to be an administrator of both a Christian school and a public high school. And then I served for about a decade as the executive director of a large Christian church. I now serve the church by facilitating strategic planning processes for ministries, by coaching pastors and other ministry leaders one-on-one, and helping churches and Christian schools develop generosity campaigns and just kind of setting up their whole generosity giving systems. And I just really enjoy that work, getting to help local churches and ministries grow and impact the kingdom.
Awesome. So some of our listeners are going to come from maybe smaller churches, so they've maybe never been in a church that had an executive director. So can you tell us just a little bit snapshot of what that role is like?
Yeah. So if you know in the corporate world, it's pretty standard to have that one last bullet point at the end of a job description, other duties as assigned. That's pretty much the only bullet point in the job description of an executive director of a church. The senior pastor that I served with for a while, I think, defined the job well when he said it's kind of like a principal is to a school as an executive director is to the church. You know, the senior pastor mostly responsible for the teaching, for the vision casting, for spiritual care, and the executive director pretty much everything else, whether it be financial systems, governance, planning, supervising a majority of the staff is usually common for an executive director, serving as kind of the chief ministry officer, as well as this chief operating officer. Again, just depending upon the context of the ministry and you've hit on it, really the size of the ministry as well.
So what inspired you to then focus on helping churches with strategic planning and finances?
Well, I think like most of your listeners, I love the local church. And I found strategic planning to be a great avenue to help churches grow. So, in helping churches go through a strategic planning process, I've seen in person the transformative impact that it can have on a ministry, whether it's helping a ministry move from a stagnant season to a season of growth, to helping a ministry define priorities, casting a new vision. Frankly, I think it's something every church should be doing and not enough are. I heard this quote a long time ago. The stewardship issue rests on the ownership issue. The more you can encourage people to be owners in your ministry, as a practical matter, the more they're going to give to your ministry. Think of it this way. I spend more money improving the house that I own compared to the apartment that I used to rent, right?
Right.
So in the church context, that means there has to be a clear vision that excites people and allows them practical ways to become involved. And my experience has shown that that rarely happens just by accident or by chance. It takes some intentional effort, some intentional planning. And that's really why I got involved in strategic planning, because that's where a good strategic planning process comes in. And I'm just honored that in this season of life, I get to use the talents and abilities God has given me to help churches do just that.
As you were describing that, I was thinking about my own seminary experience. And, there were some leadership classes, but the vast majority of our education is on the biblical side of things or is on, some of it's going to be conflict management and things like that. I'm trying to remember. I think strategic planning may have been a topic in a single class.
Right. You'd be surprised by the number of pastors that, when I talk to them about strategic planning, their first reaction is, why didn't they teach me this in seminary?
And, some of that may just be an awareness, or some of that may be the fact that, we want our pastors to really know the Word of God. That's important.
Absolutely.
And teaching communication and preaching and all these parts of it. But some of these more administrative side of leadership is a lot of times not really touched on at all, or just barely highlighted in a moment, depending on the professors you have too. Obviously, if they have more of a background in that, then they might draw that out more in some of their classes.
Right. And then these seminary graduates get out into the real world of ministry and realize just how important some of those skills, whether they be like relationship building, leading teams of staff, or lay leaders, or planning, just how important some of those things can be.
Right. So, how would you define strategic planning in the context of a church?
Well, any ministry that I work with, we start with 3 basic questions at the beginning of a strategic planning process. And we're almost obsessive about coming back to those 3 questions. And those 3 questions are very simple. First question, where are we now? Second question, where are we going? Third question, how are we going to get there? Where are we now? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? And the rest is really all details based on that. Strategic planning in a church context involves setting clear, actionable goals that are always aligned with the mission and values of a church. So any process, any good process at least, includes a good assessment of the current state of things. What's the real deal? Where are things really at right now? Identifying some opportunities and challenges, and then really developing a roadmap to achieve whatever that desired future state of ministry is. You mentioned long-term success. I think strategic planning is crucial for long-term success because it ensures that all your efforts are coordinated and focused on the most important things. It's hard to have long-term success when you don't have long-term thinking. And a good strategic planning process always keeps that front and center.
I think as pastors and as ministry leaders, we tend to be in firefighting mode a lot. And it's hard to separate out and go, okay, but I don't actually want to be a professional firefighter. I don't want to be putting out this same fire 5 years from now either, right?
Right. The challenge for any ministry leader, any leader in general, is always to kind of determine for yourself what's urgent and what's important. And it's always tempting to focus on the urgent, to put up those fires that's right in front of you. But if you're not intentional about it, you tend to only focus on the urgent at the expense of what's important.
Right. Right. So, how can we align those strategic plans with mission, vision, and values? I talked about why that was important. So, how can we make sure that those are aligned?
Your question is really about an issue I deal with in churches a lot, and it's the issue of alignment. Are the things that we do, whether they be part of a strategic plan or not part of the strategic plan, aligned with our mission, vision, and values? So just a couple thoughts on how best to ensure that those things are always aligned. It really starts at the top. You have to have a really solid mission, vision, and values that your people know, so you can align things to it. And that's why I like strategic planning, because it helps clarify all of those things. So I believe that's just kind of in the alignment question, that's the most important, is just to have the really solid foundation, that you have that mission, vision, and values, and that people are aware and know about it. And then really just always keeping that strategic plan and those goals front and center, and to be constantly reviewing it. Strategic plan and vision and mission, I firmly believe that you can't over communicate those type of things. It's so important. It's worth it. And just, another tip to make sure alignment's in place, and this, pardon me if this seems a bit self-serving, but it's to have an outsider facilitate your strategic planning process in the first place. Here's why. sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right?
Right.
So it's important to have an outsider who doesn't have a vested interest in your ministry or a specific aspect of your ministry to help you determine if there's things that you don't realize that you're not self-aware of, either as a ministry leader or a ministry as a whole. In the terms of alignment, building that firm foundation, constantly reviewing your plan, and just having a really good process up front that helps you with alignment down the road.
I could see where we all have the things in ministry that we get attached to, right? That particular actual ministry or the way of doing it. And it's hard for those of us who are in the thick of it to be able to step back and put on a different set of glasses and go, where does this fit in with what we are trying to do? And sometimes it doesn't fit because we didn't do a good job on the front end with the vision and mission. Maybe it really is important to us, but we didn't build that into the plan on the front end. And sometimes it's like, well, we like this and we're having fun with it, but it's a distraction.
Yeah, there's never a shortage of good ideas in most ministries, right? Any good committee meeting, you can brainstorm a good list of things that we ought to be doing. But
Right.
if we would do all of those, you'd lose focus and drive yourself to the insane asylum. So yeah, just having a filter, I think is a good word, having a filter, which a good strategic plan can be, having that filter in place to always compare those good ideas to, yeah, that may be a good idea, but should it be a priority for us here today?
Right. So, can you share any stories or examples of churches who've learned to do this strategic planning well and then how it impacted their ability to be effective?
Yeah, I'm full of stories. Just last week, I was talking to a pastor of a church that I worked with just a little over 3 years ago, a church in suburban Denver, Colorado. And they came to me 3 years ago with a problem. And the problem was this, and it's an all too common problem, unfortunately. Hey, Bryan, our community is exploding and growing around us, but we are shrinking. So that was the real issue kind of up front. Had a great time working with the folks there. It was a good process. The outcome of that was some goals specifically focused on some community outreach that they thought that they should be doing and that this process affirmed. And oddly enough, some facility changes that I, as an outsider, was able to recommend to them that they were not able to see for themselves. So 3 years later, attendance has increased, get this, in 3 years by 60%. A lot of that success had to do with how they approached the strategic planning process. They came into it with kind of open minds and open hands, with a willingness to change if it were necessary to change. And through the process, we built a vision that was strong enough where people felt that whatever small changes they had to make, whether it be facility or programming changes, were worth it. So yeah, that was just an update I got from a pastor just last week about a strategic planning process gone well. Another story that maybe just shows, once you've been through the process, the value that people place on it. And this goes back maybe 6 years or so ago, I was facilitating a strategic planning process for a large Christian school association. Churches in this Midwestern city had come together to form an association school and had hired me as a consultant to come facilitate their strategic planning process. As part of that, 4 pastors from 4 of those churches were part of the process. And after the process was over, all 4 pastors invited me to come facilitate strategic planning for their own churches. So it was one of those, like, once you've been through it, once you see evidence, once you see that the process works, I think that you're willing and excited to pursue strategic planning for your own ministry. So just again, a good example of how strategic planning can kind of open your eyes and motivate you to do things in your ministry that you might not otherwise have done.
Michael Hyatt says if you're inside the Coke bottle, you can't read the label.
I love that.
And
That's great.
we live inside the Coke bottle. We're in our own ministry day in and day out. And so having somebody to kind of guide you through that process and put some outside eyes on it, I could see that being really valuable.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about, this is the Pastors and Money podcast. So what role do finances play in the strategic planning process? And on the other hand, how does that process impact the church finances?
Yeah, so strategic planning and finances is almost like a chicken versus the egg, right? Which comes first? Does vision lead to a better financial situation? Do you have to have a decent financial situation to have a good vision that you can accomplish? Probably a little column A, a little column B, but I firmly believe that having a strong vision that can come out of a strategic planning process improves your finances. I'm convinced, and I've seen it in honestly every ministry that I've ever worked with, is people give to mission, people give to vision, people do not give to institutions. There was a time and place where, and this might be true with some of our oldest generations that are still alive and giving to churches and ministries, that they would give to the institution because they valued the institution. You know, for anyone 60 years and younger, the predominant, and any given study will show you this, is that people give to mission and give to vision. So, you know, part of a strategic planning process should excite people about the vision and about your ministry and where it's going. So if it is a chicken versus the egg type thing, I believe that vision comes first and that informs your finances. You know, strategic planning should help you determine priorities, and priorities should help you determine where to spend the money that you have. So it's kind of a double-edged sword on the good side. You know, you inspire people to give more through an effective vision, but also through delineating what your priorities are, you determine where to spend the money that you do have.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about, so our very first episode on this podcast was with Mark Kowalski, and he was talking about vision first budgeting.
Yes, yes.
You can't do that if you don't have a vision.
Right, right,
Or
absolutely.
if it's not clear and communicated in a way that you can actually tell, okay, so this thing fits or this thing doesn't.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, it's more than just about having a vision in place. It's having a vision that's not boring. It's having a vision that people can get behind and get excited about, that will cause them to part ways with the money that's in their wallet or bank account. So it goes back to the, I'm not going to give to an institution, but I will give to a cause. And it needs to be a cause that I feel involved in, that I feel a sense of ownership in, and then I'm excited about the future with.
Because then you can do the flip side of, okay, now let's take some of the finances we have and use them to actually execute that vision.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that actually brings us to the next question, which is, how can churches balance the spiritual mission with these practical financial considerations?
Yeah, at some level, spiritual mission and financial considerations should be lumped in the same bucket and kind of considered the same thing in the same way. Good churches, healthy churches view financial stewardship as a part of their mission. They want to ensure that they're spending wisely to further their ministry. That always includes things like transparent communication about financial matters, regular financial education for members and attenders, aligning budget priorities with mission-driven goals. Those things are all key. So in the end, like practically, I'm a visual learner. So what does that look like when things are in good balance? I think on one hand, you always keep your vision in front of your people, and you're always open and honest about your financial situation, whether it be good or bad, right? Now, also on a practical level, I'm saying that mission and practical financial considerations should be lumped together. But at a practical level, there can be tension there, right? So ideally, your practical financial situation can almost serve as a filter or as a wisdom check for what you might think your spiritual mission is and how you should pursue it. So you may think you have a strong sense of spiritual mission, and in order to accomplish that mission, you need to hire 15 staff members in the next calendar year. But you take a look at your practical finances and you're a new church plant who's struggling to pay your one full-time person. So your finances can serve as just kind of a practical wisdom check on your mission. The same thing is also true in reverse, though. If all you ever talk about is your financial limitations, I don't think you're allowing your mission and vision to drive your decision-making process. So I think there's a good, just healthy balance, symbiotic relationship between the two. You should always be talking about mission and vision. It should be driving your financial decisions. But I know a lot of churches that had a strong sense of vision and mission that ignored smart financial decision making and aren't around anymore. So I think that balance, like you asked about in your question, is really the key there.
Yeah, I think we've all known the stories of there's this really big vision. And the thing is, we have a limitless God, but he has not made us limitless.
Right.
And so he's given something to us to manage. And sometimes there's this challenge of, okay, we firmly believe we need to be doing this, but we don't have the money to do it. And so I could see even how the strategic planning could play a role in making a map to there rather than let's jump to that building that we can't afford.
Right.
Or hire the staff that we can't afford. What if instead that's where our vision is, that's where we're headed. But now let's back up from there and make a plan that leaves room for God to put some rocket fuel on that plan, but a plan to do it with wisdom. And like you said, to use that vision as the filter and that mission as the filter to go, okay, so we can't do everything all at once right now. So we're going to do this because we can do this.
Right. And any good leadership team or, good old fashioned committee probably will have a good balance of types of people. On one side of the table, you'll have people that only dream big without consideration of the finances. And on the other side, you'll have the nerdy number crunchers who are only focused on the finances. So usually there's a good mix of people, and it's up to a ministry leader to help navigate both sides of the table through the process. So you have a ministry that's healthy with its sense of mission, but also financially healthy.
That brings up a good leadership component too of making sure that you have a mix of those people in the room. And because I've definitely known leadership teams that were heavily slanted one direction or the other. And so for the leader to be aware of, okay, if I don't have those people on my staff necessarily, who can I have participate in this conversation? That could be an extra set of eyes.
Right. What other ministry leaders do I know? How can I leverage my network? Even if they can't participate like around the table, literally, what advice can I get from others who serve in ministry, who do ministry well, to help me in that process? Yeah, you nailed it there.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation with Bryan so far, and there's more to come. But our next episode, we'll be sharing 5 keys to successfully implementing your church's strategic plan. So you don't want to miss that. I look forward to seeing you next time.